Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with a devotional word for August 15th, 2024, and this is out of the book of Romans, chapter 15. In chapter 14, the Apostle Paul began to write to the Christians at Rome regarding the problem that Christians sometimes have when they disagree on things. Two main points of disagreement that we read about in chapter 14. Is it okay to eat meat or not? And there were various reasons why some felt they couldn't or shouldn't eat meat. There were others that had the freedom to do that. The Apostle Paul basically said this: follow your conscience before the Lord. If God's given you freedom to eat meat, then eat it, but don't do it in front of those who don't have that freedom. Don't be a stumbling block. And for those of you who don't eat meat, don't be judging those who have the freedom to do it. Basically, he said, this is an area where we need to not insist on our own preferences, but we need to be in a healthy, loving way, overlooking the other person's freedom. Same thing about which day for corporate worship. He carried the topic over into chapter 15, verses 1 to 13, but here in chapter 15, verse 14, he tells them this. Listen, he says to them, I'm just reminding you. I know you already know this, but I'm just here to remind you. And that's what this little message is about here today. God puts people in our lives not to tell us something for the first time necessarily, but to remind us of what we already know. Let me read to you, chapter 15, verse 14. Now I myself am confident concerning you, my brethren, that you also are all full of goodness, filled with knowledge, also able to admonish one another. He says, listen, I have a high opinion of you. You're full of goodness, you know things, you're able to counsel one another. And so this is an important point for those of us who might find ourselves in the position of reminding some Christians about some things they already know. Be sure to recognize and acknowledge the good things going on in their life. You know, sometimes if you're going to remind somebody or maybe even correct them, we want to rush to the correction or rush to the reminder. Why not start with a kind, affirming word about the good things that are going on in that person's life? You don't have to make them up, and you don't have to be insincere or creative. But he says here, listen, I know you're full of goodness. You're filled with all knowledge. You're able to admonish one another. I know that you guys are mature enough to do that. He goes on in verse 15, nevertheless, brethren, I have written more boldly to you on some points. So he's saying, I know you're able to do it, but I'm also here to do it. I have written more boldly to you on some points as reminding you because of the grace given to me by God. Grace is a multifaceted word. It means God's gifting, God's kindness, God's divine presence, receiving blessings that we don't deserve, receiving the enabling and the equipping of God, the calling of God. It means all of those things. And Paul is basically saying this, if I can paraphrase it. Nevertheless, brethren, I've written to you more boldly on some points as reminding you because God has given me the enabling and the calling and his strength and the position in your lives to do it. I'm here to do that for you, to remind you. Verse 16, that I might be a minister of Jesus Christ to the Gentiles, ministering the gospel of God, that the offering of the Gentiles might be acceptable, sanctified by the Holy Spirit. So he says, listen, by God's grace, I'm doing this. I'm not here to poke my nose in your business. I'm not here to be a sin sniffer, to be the sin police or something like that. I'm not here for that. That's not how I view myself in your lives. But I do want to speak about something, and I know you already know this, but I'm here to remind you about these things that I've just written to you. You already know them. You're able to counsel one another. But we all know that sometimes when we are in the midst of something, we kind of lose our perspective. We kind of lose sight of those things that we already know. And we simply need somebody to remind us. And so the takeaway for this short little section here is this. Are you willing to receive reminders from people when they are reminding you of something that you already know? Paul said, I do it by the grace of God. He's called me to this position. By his grace, he's given me the knowledge and the wisdom and the understanding. By his grace, he's made me an apostle. I didn't appoint myself. By his grace, he has connected me to you. And by his grace, I kind of have the holy boldness to speak up. And I just hope that you will receive this. So if you're a Christ follower, if you're a Christian, listen, we're all going to need reminding throughout our lives. Are you willing to be reminded? Even though you know it, are you willing to allow somebody to speak into your life? Hopefully, by the grace of God, they speak into your life with grace and with love and with the acknowledgement of those good things. But are you willing to receive those reminders? Now, certainly there are people that are busybodies and they poke their nose in our business and they speak to us in ways that they shouldn't. I'm not talking about that. But when you have the sense of, you know what, I did need to be reminded, will you allow yourself to be reminded? It's a good thing. It's God's design. So, some things to think about. Thanks for watching.